Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I will be talking about toxic work environments, specifically toxic work environments at Louis Vuitton. If you are new to my channel, welcome. I used to work for Louis Vuitton for many years at many different locations. And in my recent videos, I have been kind of revealing a lot of secrets and a lot of behind the scenes information on Louis Vuitton. I do plan on posting videos discussing my employment leading up to LV, the hiring process, and offering interview tips for those who are interested in working for LV or any other luxury retail company. So if you're interested in those kinds of videos, then definitely subscribe and hit the notification bell. But before I post those videos, I wanted to talk about toxic work culture. Some people were asking, what was the work environment like working for LV? They heard that it was maybe cutthroat. I briefly talked about this in my Louis Vuitton salary video. At the time that I worked for LV, there was no commission. So it wasn't as sales driven as maybe many other luxury retailers, but there definitely were some toxic traits present while I was working for LV. Now, again, I mentioned that I worked at several different locations across multiple states. I left LV, I went to law school, and now I have been working in the legal industry in my professional career for many, many years, both in the public and the private sector. So having been out of the retail industry for so long and working in the legal industry, I have the benefit of kind of hindsight. Hindsight is 20/20, and I can look back at my younger self and see a lot of the toxic traits that were present when I worked for LV. In the era that we're in now, there's kind of a sensitivity to workplace bullying and toxic work environments, and a hypersensitivity to making sure that that doesn't happen. But these are my experiences. It's tricky because a toxic work environment, how do you define that, right? I guess there are different definitions of it. So I literally just Googled toxic work environment, and I found this great article by Career Contessa. It's kind of a working women's blog. Basically listed a bunch of kind of red flags that indicated whether you are in a toxic work environment. And as I was reading this list, I was like, wow, yeah, that I experienced all those things. Now, this is a lot more common with retail, but again, this applies to many other professions. But there was, in my experience, there was a very high turnover with employees. First of all, there was a lot of turnover, I guess you would say, with seasonal employees. Around the holidays, they would hire temporary part-time seasonal employees. And I found that a lot of times the holiday and the seasonal employees were often, I don't know what led them to believe. I'm not going to say that they were promised that they would be hired full-time or part-time after the season was over, but a lot of them thought they would be, and they were not. They were there to help during the holiday season, and then once January rolled around, they were cut loose and they just were never seen from or heard from again. There was also a high turnover in departments that were maybe not as popular, as obviously the bread and butter of LV are their bags, right? And specifically their monogram bags. Some of the more struggling departments, especially back then when I worked for the company, were the fine jewelry and shoes and ready to wear. I think it's a little different now because there's kind of like a hypebeast culture going on with LV. There's a lot more collaborations, and so it's a lot more modern and a lot trendier these days. So maybe it's easier to sell that merchandise, but back then it was maybe a little dated, and people weren't as familiar with the ready-to-wear and the shoes, and especially the fine jewelry. So those departments, it was like a revolving door of managers coming in and out. We had these very high sales goals that we had to meet. They wouldn't meet it, and then they would just let go. And it was kind of like, you couldn't really talk about it, and I couldn't really ask about it. So it just was I always wondered, what happened to them. They couldn't make their numbers, and so they were just let go, and the position was filled right away. Another red flag was the terrible work-life balance. I was very fortunate that the first location I worked at was one of the largest boutiques in that region. And so I had the benefit of, I had a great manager, had a great team. They were very supportive. The operations ran very smoothly. There was pretty much great communication. And so I kind of saw the disparity when I helped to open up a brand new boutique in a different state. I mentioned that I moved to a different location that didn't have an LV boutique in that entire state. So I helped to open from the ground up a brand new boutique, new construction. I helped to train new employees. I kind of was the acting operations, like stockroom supervisor and maybe operations manager. A lot of the processes that were in place at the larger boutique, in terms of shipping and receivings and customer delegation, none of that existed at these other boutiques because they were a lot smaller. And so it was kind of like every man for himself. So for me to go from a location that was very smoothly run to a location where it was just a free-for-all was very confusing and contradictory. At my first location, they were very strict about work-life balance. Nobody would ever call me on my personal cell phone on my day off and ask me, where was such and such located, or for client information or anything. But at this other location, it, as I said, was pretty much a free-for-all. And so I was getting calls on my personal cell phone. Again, I mentioned I was a college student at the time, and I set up my schedule so that I was in classes all day long, Tuesdays and Thursdays, all day long. Okay, so those are my 2 days off. And then maybe one day a weekend I was working part-time most of the time. I eventually transitioned to full-time, but without a doubt, on my day off, I would receive a frantic call and a barrage of text messages from my coworkers, from my manager, asking me every single question about every operation that was run in the boutique. And, I felt an obligation to respond because I was very young when I worked for LV, and I basically chalk it up to, I didn't know better. I didn't really set boundaries for myself, and I didn't make it clear that, hey, please do not contact me while I'm in classes. Please don't contact me on the weekends and evenings, my rare free spare time. I want to answer questions about work stuff. But to no avail. So there was kind of fuzzy boundaries, I guess, between your work life and your personal life. Another red flag is not being able to use your vacation days. A toxic work environment is one where the company will tell you, yes, please use your leave, use your days off, you earned it. But then when you actually go to request those days off, you're denied. You're either denied, or you have to ask multiple times, or you have to get somebody to cover for you. And for me, it's like, I shouldn't have to beg another person to cover a day. I should just be able to submit a request within a reasonable time frame and be able to, take some time off. Again, I was a college student and I was on a competitive dance team when I was in college. And so I felt that I had to beg and plead and, offer favors and almost bribe people to work on a day so that I could go and, on the rare times where I had a competition or a showcase or something, I felt that I had to beg someone else to cover for me so that I could, request a day off. And this wasn't, like a last minute request. These are, months in advance. And the culture was such that I didn't feel that I could freely, ask for, what rightfully was a day off or two. Another time I was going on vacation with my family. I'm Filipino, I don't know if you know that, but I was going to the Philippines. And, these are rare trips. I hadn't gone to the Philippines for years and years, I think since I was 5 years old. And so I was really looking forward to this trip, but I had to work these, deals to get coverage for me so that I could go on this trip. And if you're not familiar with traveling overseas, especially to the Philippines or, Asia in general, the Philippines is literally as far as you can go. If you look at a globe, the Philippines is as literally as far as you can go around the globe before you start coming back around again. It takes forever to get there. It takes a full 24 hours or more. Basically 3 days go pretty much to getting there and back. And so I finally was able to go. I had a great time. And then on the way back, unfortunately, my outgoing flight from Manila to my layover was in Korea. My flight was delayed, like super delayed, to the point that when I landed in Korea, the flight from Korea back to, the States was canceled. Like there was no flight going out until the next day. So they put everyone, and they knew it, and they were waiting for us at the airport. We had hotel vouchers. And I remember being so frantic and worried because I literally had to work the very next day. Like that day that I landed, I was going to work the very next day. And so this put me out a day. And I was so worried. In a healthy work environment, if there was any kind of like an emergency, you know, family emergency or whatever, you should feel comfortable enough with your supervisor to let them know like, hey, there's an emergency. I'm not going to be able to make it, unfortunately, you know, and that's it. I mean, I didn't plan on this happening, but I was so stressed and so worried and anxious that I was in this foreign country. Nobody spoke English. I was alone because my mother, you know, I was traveling with my mother, but she stayed, you know, because she was staying longer. I had to go back because I had to go to work. And so I'm alone. Oh, and I was so sick. Oh my gosh, I was so sick. I had the flu. Like I got sick while I was, you know, overseas. And so coming back, oh, it was just the worst trip ever. And so I'm in this foreign country in a foreign hotel. Nobody speaks English. But this was before Instagram and social media. So I was desperately trying to get in contact with my brother so that he could call the boutique during, you know, working hours and let them know like, hey, Sydney isn't going to be able to make it today. She's stuck in Korea. And so he finally was able to do it. But oh my God, I remember I was so mad because it cost me, as we were checking out of the hotel, and, you know, it was covered by the airlines because there was a delay, but I'm taking the shuttle back to the airport, and the hotel receptionist was running after me onto the shuttle, and she said, oh, you owe, and, you know, I didn't understand her because she was speaking Korean. She was waving a bill because I owed what ended up being $80 for this, you know, 5-minute phone call to the States to tell my brother to let my job know I'm not going to be able to make it. I remember being so mad that I had to pay almost $100 to this hotel for a phone call so that I would be covered at work. But, you know, anyway. So yeah, it was a very stressful trip back, and it was all because, and, you know, I do admit part of it was me. I do bear the burden of carrying guilt because I didn't want to let my team down. But, you know, that also isn't healthy. So yeah, that was just another kind of an imbalance in the work-life balance. Sundays we would open later, and so I am fully expecting that I would report to work at a certain time, let's say, you know, 11 o'clock versus 9 o'clock if it was during the weekday. One of the managers, and this was more of one of my, I guess, kind of a toxic manager, which I'll get into, she at the very last minute had scheduled a meeting for that Sunday at, you know, 9 or something, like 1 or 2 hours before I was supposed to report. And I don't know, I know that, okay, maybe to some people that's not a big deal, but as a college student, you know, who was going out on a Saturday, you know, also I was traveling very far, I was like, no, I'm not, you can't just tell me the day before that my work schedule is changing such that I have to report 2 hours earlier. I'm sorry. I mean, I will try to make it, but I there's no promises. So so I didn't. I mean, I didn't. I think I had, you know, I had some kind of a commitment that morning. I was so booked in college because I was working full time. At that point, I was going to school full time. I was on a dance team. You know, I had a boyfriend who ended up being my husband. And, you know, my hours were blocked out. And so I had, you know, something going on. I was like, no. And I finally, towards the end, I kind of started maybe growing a spine, you know, and I was no longer like a bright-eyed freshman in college. I was almost going to graduate. I was preparing to go to law school, and I put my foot down and I said, no, you know, okay, I understand that you forgot to let us know about this meeting, but unfortunately I won't be able to make it. I will report to work at my scheduled time, but, you know, I'm not going to be able to make this meeting. And so I don't think there were repercussions for that because I think she did realize that she was wrong. But it just was another example of, you know, kind of there being tension because she thought that everyone should just automatically schedule their life around work. And to me, you know, I had a life. I had other plans and other goals, and, you know, it was a job to me. And while I was working at that job, you know, at my designated hours, I was definitely there 100%, but I wasn't going to change my entire schedule and my weekend around to accommodate a meeting that was very hastily planned. Looking back, I'm glad that I put my foot down because ordinarily, and in the past, I would have just changed everything and then gone to work because that's what I was told, you know, go to work at this time, even though it's last minute. And so, but yeah, it was just so toxic. And probably most important kind of red flags of a toxic work environment are terrible leadership and terrible communication. And I lump them together because terrible communication and terrible leadership kind of go hand in hand. A good leader would inspire and motivate employees to want to do the best that they can. Even though this wasn't going to be my, lifelong career working at LV, I knew going forward that I had other plans. All my employment would reflect on me. And so I always wanted to do the best that I could. What made it difficult was when there was such contradictory leadership and communication. And I mentioned this in my LV perks video. My first manager was amazing. She was so great. She was very inspiring. She really motivated us to do the best that we could. Unfortunately, I moved, as I said, and one of my other managers was not that way. And I remember even the first time I met her, I was like, wow, she's really intense. And she reminded me, and I think she took a page out of literally The Devil Wears Prada. I imagine that she thought of herself as the main character, the Anna Wintour inspired boss. She was very abrasive. I don't want to be indelicate, but the leadership and management, varied greatly, and it really affects your day-to-day at work. The first boutique that I worked at it ran like a smooth ship. It was just up, we all knew what we were doing. We all were trained in the same way. They had their specific operations and you did not deviate, and it was for a reason, and it was great. With this other location, it wasn't that way, and it kind of was left to me. I thought to myself, okay, I'm gonna take the initiative. There is no proper shipping operation. Now, again, I will go into this more in future videos, but in the first location, the shipping and the shipments and charge sends process they were very specific. They had forms that you would fill out. You had to put the client's address and information. The shipment method, it was like a factory assembly line kind of. There was no such thing at this other location. This other location, it was a free-for-all of poorly written, handwritten Post-its slapped on a box. We didn't know whether it was paid for. You had to go back and double check receipts. Things were stapled. The wrong items were invoiced with, the wrong package. It just was so messy, and it was so difficult transitioning from this very orderly environment to this just mishmash of behind the scenes, operations. I couldn't even steady that ship, because they were just so used to doing whatever they wanted. I remember I tried to implement these forms and they, kind of tolerated that for a little bit, but then eventually they're like, oh, we don't have time here, and they would scribble on a Post-it like, here, send this to this place. And so, you kind of just had to follow their lead, and it was not the best lead. It was not the best leadership. Every location routinely would have inventory. And so you would come in very early, you'd wear sweatpants, and you would, you were assigned to a different location, and you would have to take stock of every single item, every SKU, every style number. And it was very orderly. It was great. It was so easy at the first place. The second place, however, it was chaos. Things were mismarked, things were not in the right place. And I remember part of me trying to fix this was, okay, I need to organize this stockroom. It looked like a bomb had gone off in the stockroom. So I went in and I was like, okay, this goes here, this goes here. I was trying to organize everything. And I asked for two simple things. I asked for a clipboard so that it would be easier for me to do inventory and mark, stuff and check things off and go through the list of stock. And I asked for a box cutter because, again, I was kind of the designated shipment receiver sender person. And when you're opening up boxes and boxes and boxes of stuff and then boxes within boxes, I don't know if you know this, but box cutters they just make it so much easier. They literally, that is their sole purpose, is to open up boxes efficiently and safely. What you should not use to open boxes are scissors. Because just think about it, they're scissors, they open up like this, you're holding it in one way, it can fly around. The first boutique that I worked at, they had, all the supplies were lined up, you would use it, you would put it back, and it was great. So at this second location, all I asked from my manager, they were doing a supplies run or supplies order. And I said, oh, could I get a clipboard? It's easier when I'm walking around the stockroom to get, to check stuff out. And also kind of get a box cutter so that I can open up these boxes and also break them down more easily. The assistant manager came back and she was like, oh, why do you need this? And she was questioning me. And I said, what do you mean? What? I need the clipboard to do the inventory and the box cutter to open all the hundreds of boxes that were coming in. And so she went back, the Devil Wears Prada type. And then the assistant manager came back to me and said, oh yeah, she said no. I was like, what? A clipboard literally is like $2, okay? A box cutter is maybe $3 or $4. But like, so for them to deny that, I was just like, what kind of operation are you running, you know? And one of the other managers, she saw my confusion on my face. She was like, Cindy, don't worry about it. And the next day, she's so sweet. She came in and she was like, here's your clipboard. Please don't be upset. And she got me this, and it was really cute. It was a really bright pink clipboard. And I was like, oh my God, thank you. I was like, thank you so much. And it was great. It made things so much easier, but they still didn't get me the box cutter. And I remember being so frustrated. And if you watch my video where I talk about LV perks, I mentioned how when I was training employees, you know, we have to be very careful when we open up these bags and get these items ready to be put out on the floor, because bags are wrapped in plastic and you have to be very careful when you're opening it up. And one of the employees that I was training, she was using scissors to cut the plastic off a bag, and she sliced through the leather handle of the bag. And so we had to send it to RTV. It was damaged out. Like there was no way we could sell it. A way to prevent that from happening is to make sure that you have the right supplies. So I just felt like you couldn't invest $5 in the correct tools to prevent, you know, thousands of dollars worth of damage. I was just like, oh my gosh, like what kind of place is this? Another thing with terrible leadership, I guess, is when they ask you to do things that are outside of your job description. Now this is questionable because a lot of job descriptions can be very vague, and they'll say, you know, do other things as needed. There's kind of like a caveat last requirement, which is do things as needed to support the store's mission or something like that. Something that's just very vague and open-ended. In this case, I was the designated coffee runner. I don't know how it happened, and I just assumed it was because I was the youngest person and, you know, I was young and whatever. I was the one who they made go to Starbucks every day and get everyone's coffee order. And I remember thinking, like, I'm not doing this anymore. You know, I was so sick of it, because the other annoying thing is all this time, you know, where I'm in the stock room, you know, fixing other people's mistakes and getting coffee for everyone else. That counts as my sales time. They don't deduct those hours against my sales goals for the day. So for example, if I'm working an 8-hour shift, I'm expected to sell 8 hours worth of merchandise. You know, they don't deduct like the 2 hours that I'm in the stock room and then the 30 minutes or whatever that I'm getting coffee for everyone. So it counted against my time, because now I'm not meeting my sales goals because I'm out doing all these other errands for everyone. Speaking of errands, another thing, and this was probably one of the most frustrating, and looking back, it's almost kind of a violation of labor laws. The Devil Wears Prada manager would ask me, or not ask, I mean, I guess she would ask, but she would say, hey, Cindy, we need you to go to Best Buy and go pick up a power cord. And the Best Buy was like 15 miles away. And I would have to go in my personal car, you know, drive with my own gas. And by the way, I was a broke college student. And I remember the first time I was like, okay, yeah, sure. And I did it. And I remember even then thinking like, wait a minute, am I supposed to be doing this? Like, this isn't part of my thing, right? Anything outside, like anything that puts me outside of the store, I didn't really understand. And on my, you know, in my own car and with my own gas. But, you know, I did it because I guess I didn't really know any better. Another errand, and again, I'll talk more about this. People are asking about VICs. This was one thing that I had to do for a VIC. You know, we had a VIC, a very important client, and we had gotten the VIC gifts in, and they wanted me to go and personally deliver to this client this gift. And he lived so far, okay? He lived so far, and I was like, what? And you know, they didn't offer to reimburse me for gas. They didn't offer to let me take the manager's car. I drove my own personal car, my own personal, you know, almost empty gas tank as a broke college student, and drive this gift to this client who didn't even care. I mean, I remember going up to him and saying, oh, hi, it's, you know, so-and-so, Cindy from, you know, LV. And she's like, and he was like, oh, thanks. You know, okay. He probably didn't even, I don't think he opened it. I mean, and then I had to drive all the way back, and it was like an hour and a half total, you know, round trip. And again, that was time taken from my, you know, from my sales floor hours. I don't know if there was another time, but I know that the final time that they asked me to go somewhere else, and I finally put my foot down and I said, I don't have gas. Like, I don't have gas in my car, you know. And so I remember my assistant manager, she was like, oh, okay. And then she didn't ask any questions and they didn't ask me to do that again. And so looking back, I do regret not doing that sooner and not putting my foot down sooner. Now, the final red flag is the presence of gossipy behavior and cliques and kind of cutthroat, non-team player-ish behavior. And that definitely was present at LV. Again, it varied by location and it varied by your colleagues. There were some that I was really, really close with. And then there were some that just didn't like anyone. And I mean, I couldn't really do anything about it. You know, I mentioned in my last video when I talked about a very angry customer return who was returning shoes, and she was mad that I dared to look at the shoes to see if it was unworn. But I mentioned that I generally get along with everyone. I think that I'm very friendly. I smile, you know, I'm just generally a happy person. But there were some people who are just so, I would just say, cutthroat. And, you know, maybe it's because they were coming from other retail jobs where it was very commission based. And so they're just used to having to like run out and attack customers for sales to the detriment of their other coworkers. And there were a couple times, and I mean, this might even be a whole other video, but again, at the time we didn't work on commission, but there were some client advisors who acted like they did. And so they would try to steal clients. They would be mad if you were helping a client and you know, they had previously helped that client as though they had dibs on the person. I remember one time there was one client advisor, and you know, I get along with everyone for the most part, but like when you're on the sales floor, some of these client advisors, it's almost like they're two-faced. Because then it's like the claws come out and they, you know, think that you're stealing, you know, food from out of their mouth or something. But a client came in and she walked towards the ties. She asked me, "Oh, do you have this in this color or whatever?" So I went over and I said, "Oh yeah, you know, here you go." And I gave it to her. And another client advisor came, and I feel like she kind of hip checked me and it was like, "Oh yes, thank you. I remember you. Here you go." And she, even though I had brought out the ties and I was already helping this client, the other advisor came out and, you know, she said, "Oh, she was here the other day." You know, and I was helping her, and I was like, okay. I was always the youngest at these stores. At a certain point, I wasn't always the newest, but I generally, just out of an abundance of caution and trying to keep the peace, I would generally defer to, you know, whoever was not, she wasn't even my superior, but whoever was older. I mean, that just was how it was, you know, people who, a lot of times the employees who were older felt that maybe they had more of a right to, I don't know, the clients. So anyway, she just kind of took over the sale, and I was like, okay, whatever, that's okay. That one wasn't a big deal, but there was one time, I'll talk more about this when I talk about my kind of celebrity clients. There was one client who came in, and he was a well-known athlete, and he came in and he was looking at the luggage, and it's like, you know, when you see that, you're like, oh, okay, luggage, it's like a big ticket item. So I went over and I started helping him. He wanted to buy Christmas gifts for his entire something, either his family or his team. And immediately, so I was already helping him, but when one of the other managers saw that this client was potentially going to be a huge sale, she basically ran over, you know, rushed over and said, "Oh, I'll take care of him." And I said, okay, sure. And you know, what are you going to do? I remember seeing later, it was published in, there was no Instagram at the time, but you know, kind of like either celebrity gossip. It was either like a celebrity gossip type website, or it could have been, you know, there was an internal LV kind of a magazine. That manager, I was told from another manager, she was, and that's where kind of the clique comes in. She had originally come from a different location, and I guess maybe she felt that her loyalties maybe lay with that location. So she basically referred this huge client with a huge potential sale to another location, because then I saw a picture of this client at that other location surrounded by all the luggage that he ended up purchasing at that location, even though he had first come to me. And I kind of brushed it off because, again, you know, we weren't working on direct commission. And I just looked at that and I was like, huh, okay. But my other manager, my great manager, she saw that, and there was kind of a rift already between the two of them. And she was so mad. She was like, "That should have been your sale. He came to you first. I don't know why so-and-so sent him over to this other location, blah, blah, blah." And she basically, you know, it's because she suspected it was because that other manager had, you know, ties or was a part of a clique with another store. But anyway, so those are just some quick stories to illustrate the fact that some boutiques at LV did have a toxic work environment. And looking back, there were some things I might have handled differently, but you know, at the time I was very young and a lot of times I just didn't know any better. And so I hope that it's changing nowadays, especially considering the culture that we're in, where a lot of people are very sensitive to that type of kind of toxic traits of work. I still gained a lot of experience working at LV, and I definitely will talk more about it in future videos. That's just my personal experience. If I can think of more, I will definitely follow up in another video. But if you think you are in a toxic work environment, let me know what your experiences were and how you dealt with them. And maybe if it was from years ago, how you would handle it now, knowing that it's not okay to work in that kind of an environment. But I hope you enjoyed this topic. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to catch you in my next video. Bye.